Hi, everyone. This is Matt Brown here with D1 Ticker and Collegiate Sports Connect. And I'm joined here by Joe Ovies to tell us a little bit more here about the big news with the ACC Network. Joe, thanks for taking some time here to chat with me.
Anytime, Matt.
I understand things here that about a week ago, the ACC Network announced that they now have a new carriage deal with Comcast, which I believe was the last remaining major cable provider to not include the ACC Network as part of their traditional bundle. Is that right?
Yeah, and this was about 2 years in the making. Jim Phillips, the new ACC commissioner, back in July of this year, had talked about how they were close. If you looked at the ACC network scheduling plans, I mean, you saw a lot of Virginia Tech. There was a Virginia Tech Notre Dame game earlier this year. All of that was in the hopes of getting Comcast to bite. Obviously, it happened later than they wanted to, but it happened. And, when you talk to people in this industry, Matt, I know you talk to a lot of these consultants and people behind the scenes.
Yeah.
The negotiation process between the carrier and the content creators and are always going to the 11th hour, right? And this one, I think, was probably the last of the major fights between Disney and a big cable provider before things really start to get scarier for everybody down the line in terms of these carriage fights. You're seeing this already with Bally Sports and Sinclair, where the distributors just don't really feel the pull of playing by Sinclair's rules or their demands because they see that on the regional level, other than the games themselves, there's not that much demand for the stuff throughout the week. So I think through the power of Disney and the way that they can negotiate, this is why the ACC partnering with ESPN was so important for John Swofford, the former commissioner, because he knew that while it might not always be pretty, Disney tends to get what it wants because they have so many other things that they can use for leverage with somebody like Comcast, as opposed to what the Pac-12 has been dealing with for a long time, and obviously the regional networks are dealing with right now.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm glad you mentioned that because my understanding is that part of the reason that this happened now rather than maybe 18 months ago was less because demand for ACC Central or specific content just exploded recently, but because Comcast has to do a bunch of other negotiations with other Disney properties or ESPN properties, and maybe it makes more sense to have those negotiations on the timeline for the other stuff you're negotiating with rather than an ACC one-off. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that was always part of the planning going forward. Disney can go to Comcast and say, hey, look, if you want Freeform and you want ESPN and ESPN2 and you want all these other things, let's negotiate a package deal. We've spent so much time, Matt, talking about unbundling over the last 5 to 10 years and cutting the cord. Disney's still selling bundles. And they're not just selling bundles to us. I mean, we see that with Hulu, Disney Plus, and ESPN Plus, but they're also selling these bundles to providers like Comcast, where in the long run, like, hey, it'd be really unfortunate if you had to pay this much for ESPN, and man, people would be really upset if you didn't have this, right? So they can utilize that. Again, not always the smoothest way to go about it, but it happened, and now the ACC can start realizing more of what the financial gain is from the ACC network. Is it going to catch them up to the Big Ten? No. Is it going to catch them up to the SEC? No. There's other factors that play into that, but every little bit helps for the ACC.
Unquestionably. And if I'm understanding correctly here, now that you bring in Comcast, if you're an ACC fan, now basically anywhere in the United States, you're going to have an opportunity to be able to get this network, whether that's through a YouTube TV option or through your primary cable provider. This was the last really big remaining, target left on the board, right?
Yeah, although, it's funny you bring up the YouTube TV, or I'm a Hulu subscriber, and that's the thing that has always been kind of comical to me. This is not 1995, okay? If you want to find some channel, you'll be able to find it. I mean, I remember a long time ago, I would argue to John Swofford, the former commissioner of the ACC, that kind of going on your own and streaming was the way that's where things were headed. And they were still looking at all the money coming in from the cable networks. And I understood why they wanted to go chase that money the same way the Big Ten obviously did. But I wasn't right about streaming, but in a weird sort of way, I ended up being right because, look, shout out to all of my friends in the area that have Comcast, but if you really wanted to watch the ACC network, if you really wanted to watch Virginia Tech, if you really wanted to watch Virginia, you could have. It just required you to go get Hulu and ditch Comcast. Hulu's available everywhere. I can watch Hulu on my computer right now. I have it on my Apple TV at home. So in a weird sort of way, it became more accessible to watch the ACC network because of those streaming options. But that's not what this is about. And that's actually what it's never been about. It's been about subsidizing yourself through people who never watch the ACC network. That's always been the dirty little secret about ESPN and ESPN2. It is subsidized by all the people who don't watch it, but it's on their cable channel. That's how they made as much money as they did. And that's what the ACC network has been trying to do. That's what the SEC network did and the Big Ten network did. So it's really just about getting those homes, not necessarily actual viewers.
So now that you're in about as many homes as you can expect to get, right? Like, what you're just describing there, right? That's essentially the Rutgers principle. What we've been explaining to every Big Ten fan over the last several years about this. This is why this team's in this league. There's not a Rutgers available, immediately for the ACC, which is an amazing thing to say right now in the year of our Lord 2021, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You're in the homes now. Maybe you're not in quite as many households that aren't actually watching you as you'd like, but the distribution problem seems to be well on its way to being solved. That just leaves the revenue problem. And I know you and I and the rest of the internet talk about this a lot here, but short of dramatically altering your membership, are there really meaningful things to address the revenue side, whether that's paywalling certain content or trying to find ways to use streaming data to upsell? Or I'm guessing now by your body language right now, you already know the answer to that question.
No. The answer, I mean, look, I hate to be blunt.
Sure.
On this particular topic, but it is what it is. Jim Phillips was hired from Northwestern, and the argument that was made to me by a couple of people around the conference is that look what he was able to carve out at Northwestern, right? Northwestern's in the Big Ten. They're not the richest school. They don't have the biggest fan base. It's a private school in Chicago area, those types of things. But Jim Phillips still found a way to optimize what they had at Northwestern to be competitive, right? And I think that's what they're going to have to try to do with the ACC. Find ways within the margins to stay competitive with the SEC in the Big Ten. You just alluded to it. The ACC, as it's currently constructed, simply cannot compete with the SEC and the Big Ten in terms of schools. The ACC is comprised of smaller private institutions or schools that are in bigger markets where they don't necessarily talk about those schools. Like Pitt just won the ACC championship on Saturday. What do you think they're talking about Monday afternoon on Pittsburgh Sports Talk Radio? They're talking about Ben Roethlisberger and whether or not he's actually going to come back next year. So that is the life of the ACC going forward. However, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I think this is an important thing, and I think it's something that we have to start getting comfortable with. And we have to start getting comfortable with what John Swofford did in the first place by signing this contract with Disney ESPN all the way through, 2035, 2036.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with being third. You're there. You're in the mix. You have football playing schools at Clemson and Florida State and Miami. Are you telling me that Florida State and Miami's biggest problems is because they don't have enough homes that are carrying the ACC network? No, that's program malfeasance at this point in time. They keep hiring the wrong people at Florida State. That's the bigger problem. Miami just had this bizarre coup take place with the Board of Trustees and big monies that got Manny Diaz out of there and a new AD to bring in Mario Cristobal. Is that the ACC conference's fault? No, it's Miami's fault for not having their act together for as long as they've had it. So you can only use network stuff as an excuse for so long. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with being third. John Swofford got ripped a lot for signing that deal with ESPN. But I feel you have to view it in a different way. If you didn't sign that deal, if you didn't get the grant of rights locked in for as long as they did, do you think the ACC would still exist today? Or would it be the Big 12?
Not the same way that it's set up right now, when half of the other schools in that league had plenty of other opportunities to go elsewhere.
Right. So you're seeing what's happened in the Big 12 with Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC. Are you telling me that those rumors of the Big 10 from a couple of years ago where Georgia Tech and North Carolina were talking to Jim Delaney, if the grant of rights didn't exist, that we would see further breakup in the ACC? So to me, I think we have to just be honest with where the ACC is as a group of schools and the size of those schools, and why John Swofford did the right thing by locking it down as long as they did. And they'll also get a sizable bump here in the next, I'd say I think it's 5 years. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure in the next 4 to 5 years, that whole sub-licensing deal with the old Raycom is off the books, and the money that would be going to ESPN, who's been selling those games to Bally Sports, it all comes back to ESPN, and you'll see a sizable increase in what those schools make in about 5 years.
I'm glad you made this argument because, quite frankly, this is the same thing I've been saying for as long as anybody throws a microphone in front of me, even for the Pac-12, right? Like on some level, if your institution is committed to whether it's college basketball or college football or any other sport, you can find the money, right? We just saw this weird coup, but Miami's giving Crystal Ball $8-9 million a year, even though their TV revenue is going to be a fraction of what the Big Ten. You could get that money if Oregon or USC is dropping $10 million on Lincoln Riley, even though their TV deal isn't as good. You can find the money. It's a question of what your administration's doing, or things that are outside of all of our control. It's not a linear relationship between money and wins necessarily, or else we'd be talking about Texas more often.
There's a blessing and a curse to it, as Bomani Jones of ESPN points out to us a lot when we talk about like area football. NC State, North Carolina do. Institutional want to, right? If you have people who want your school to be good at football, then they'll find the money to do that. I mean, hey, SMU got in trouble. They wanted to be a good football, right? I mean, that's how the Pony Express existed. So there's always ways to make this work. Miami wanted to be so good in football that they wanted to rebrand themselves as NILU, right? And there was a guy who was running these MMA gyms that essentially created a payroll for the Hurricanes. And then when there wasn't success on the field, guess who the first person they went to talk to when Manny Diaz was kind of going through it at Miami? They talked to this guy from these MMA gyms. And he's like, well, I'm not saying to fire the coach, but I did give up a lot of money. So there has to be an institutional want to. And we're starting to see that at some places now that we've come out of the pandemic. And as Lauren Brownlow, my colleague here at WRAL Sports Fan and 99.9 The Fan likes to say, the veil is off with some of these schools who, I mean, I know you wrote about this a lot on Extra Points, where, the schools don't have to cut the swim team. It's just a big show. And now all of a sudden they have all this money to pay Lincoln Riley, all this money to pay Brian Kelly, or now with Mario Cristobal at Miami. So schools will cry poor when it's time to cry poor, but when they really want something, they're going to find the money for it.
So let me ask you this. If we're going to operate on the assumption here that, yes, you want to maximize revenue, that's part of your charge if you're Jim Phillips, to find a way to close that gap as much as you possibly can, even though that structurally you may not be able to. We understand that revenue isn't necessarily the end-all be-all, or at least television revenue isn't necessarily the end-all be-all. But trying to get into the weeds about what this network is here as a product. Now you're in a place now where you have really pretty wide distribution. Yeah. Is there anything creative or unique that the ACC network could be doing to differentiate itself from some of its other peers, or innovate from a more production standpoint? Or is this like we kind of know what this thing is, now we're just trying to find ways to squeeze a few more dollars out of it?
Yeah, and I say this because I have developed friends over at the ACC network who I think do a good job in what they're asked to do. However, it's an unrated network, and the commercial loads would indicate to you that it's an unrated network. I mean, it's nothing but Bell and Howell products. I've kind of turned it into a radio gag here back in Raleigh, where I review ACC network products like the Pop and Play, or the Alien tape, or the TAC glasses and stuff like that, right? Sure. And there's a completely different story about how those ads end up on networks like that, because I tried to buy commercial time on the ACC network.
You did.
I did. I
challenge, yeah.
I wanted to. I thought, well, if these are the ads that they're running on the ACC network, well, then hell, I should be able to buy advertising on the cheap, right?
Sure.
But that's not how it works. I direct the ESPN, and what they gave back to me was incredibly cost prohibitive going through Disney directly. So there's like a weird ad broker network that exists where somebody buys up all these unused commercial times, and then they sell them back to a place like Bell and Howell or Bulbhead, and that's how you end up with like the My Pillow guy while I'm trying to watch a basketball game. So there's a story for you to investigate, right?
Yeah.
Who is this broker behind the scenes that's buying all these ads on the cheap and
We're
then
in the
selling
wrong
them back?
business once again.
Right. Well, yes, clearly. Um, so what should the ACC network be? That's a great freaking question.
Right?
I
Yeah.
would like the ACC network. This is fanciful talking here because the presidents and the ADs are the ones that want to see what they see, right?
Yeah.
I would love to see the ACC network do more to acknowledge the identity of the ACC, which is not a kumbaya, it just means more ACC chants type fan base. Nobody in the ACC, at least in my experience, gets hyped up because another school wins a national championship. That's not, like there is no.
That's an SEC specific phenomenon. That I could not think
right.
of any. Yeah, that's not how the triangle works at all.
That is not how this area works. It is
Right.
The ACC is petty, and ACC fans love the pettiness. It's part of identity. It has to do with the acquisition of northeastern schools. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a weirdness to ACC fandom that's extremely online that they refuse to tap into for whatever reason. I mean, I know we live in a world of sickos football, right? That's like a deep cut for the extremely online people out there. But I do feel like you could carve out a niche for that type of fan demographic. I think the SEC network does this now with Spencer Hall and their rebranding of the Thinking Out Loud show, which is a show that exists on a linear network, but is promoted and ends up on my timeline like an internet show would. And I think that's what the ACC network needs to do. For whatever reason, they refuse to do that. They're more interested in doing Bristol-type studio shows that you can see just about anywhere else. And they haven't tapped into the strangeness and personality of extremely online ACC fans that maybe might not, if ratings aren't going to be the thing that ultimately drives you because it's an unrated network, then at least you could carve out some sort of social media buzz that just doesn't exist with the ACC network. If you look at the ACC network social media channels, they're basically like copy paste versions of school accounts where, Sam Howell breaks 5 tackles on his way to the end zone. You'll see the highlight and it's like, Sam Howell's built different, huff emoji, huff emoji, huff emoji. Like that stuff I can get from the UNC account if I want to. Yeah. Somebody who's following the ACC network account who happens to be an NC State fan or a Clemson fan doesn't give a crap about that. So I do feel that there's a different way to go about it. But you know what? It's not my network. It's not my network. It's a conference network. The conference wants all their stuff promoted in a positive light, and that's how it's going to continue going forward.
That really is a great point, because I think we've already seen other conferences that aren't blessed with enormous resources kind of play that strategy out a little bit. I think the MAC really leaned into this, certainly much more so earlier this decade, with the idea of explicitly making the Tuesday night game kind of sickos football. The Sun Belt, used to let Reddit run their Twitter account occasionally. We did it when I worked for SB Nation before they changed communications crews. And you're right. It's a good example. And I say this with deep love as somebody that worked for a long time with both Spencer and Richard, that they're not for everybody. And if I was a 61-year-old like Tennessee fan, I might look at that particular television program and feel a little alienated. But for somebody who is like that 25 to 40, extremely on Twitter kind of person, which is part of my audience and part of your audience too, you're right. That's catnip. I honestly hadn't really even thought about that, but you're right. You're in a footprint where there are multiple fan bases who are likely to break an open record story before I can. That is a unique kind of petty, and perhaps it's worth celebrating.
Yeah, I was gonna say, this area pretty well then, if you know those types of things, and it's interesting too because I deal with that on a local basis, right?
Sure.
So Joe Giglio, my co-host here at 99.9 The Fan, and we do this show from 3 to 6 every day. We both went to NC State. I graduated from NC State in 2001. Giglio graduated from NC State in 1997. Now I didn't grow up here, and Giglio grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in South Florida. But we get the dynamic of state, but we also get the dynamic of Carolina and role here as well. And unlike I feel like the triangle is a good example of the ACC as a whole. There is no one monolithic thought process for the betterment of the conference. Everybody has their own little worlds, and they like seeing other schools, the Schadenfreude of seeing other schools suffer.
Sure.
And this is something that we've dealt with here locally the last couple of years as I've called it, the SEC-ification of college media has taken hold. I'll use NC State as an example because I'm an NC State grad and our radio station is based in Raleigh, North Carolina, where
Sure.
NC State is based. If you go to Mississippi State, if you go to Texas, if you go to Oklahoma, like their media apparatus is very much about that university all the time. The whole town gets behind them, everything else. And the coaching staffs have gotten used to this sort of high tide lifts all ships type thing. You have the 24/7 network. You have the On3 Sports that's starting up. You have that weird quasi fan media, through SB Nation. Shout out to Backing the Pack and Steven and Alec do a good job with that website where, they try to be a little bit more objective. So you have all of these team-centric accounts and outlets, along with NC State's own media arm. Jeff Gravely, who used to work with us here at WRAL and 99.9 The Fan, now works for NC State as their main voice and presenter. So you're used to having all of these team-centric approaches that usually try to take the positive spin out of even a loss, right?
Sure.
But then those fans hear us and they go, well, wait a minute. You went to State. You're based in Raleigh. NC State is Raleigh. Why aren't you doing the same thing, failing to understand that as a radio station that covers all of the triangle, we have other things to keep in mind too. We have UNC fans that listen to the show. We have fans from, the triangle is such a transit area because of the technology and all the jobs here. I mean, we got people from Virginia Tech. We got people who are SEC fans. We have to cover a really large range of person. And if we just basically were all NC State all the time, I'd be probably shutting out a good 40% of my audience or more. So, why would I do that? And any level of small criticism or objective view as to why NC State won or lost gets met with, you should be promoting State. Like, why are you guys so critical on NC State? And I've dealt with this with the coaching staff too.
No, sure.
So it's a weird SEC-ification of how these things operate. And I feel like that's extended itself to the ACC, where I'm telling you right now, there's an AD or a coach that watches the ACC network and they're watching Packer and Durham in the morning. And if Packer so much as makes a slight j at the expense of a school, I bet you there's somebody in that office that's upset because they're going, wait a minute, it's our network. That's not why we do this. That's why the SEC in its own weird sort of way has had a weird push and pull with Paul Feinbaum. Because you got to remember, Feinbaum's not somebody who's always been rah. I mean, he roots for the SEC as a whole, but he has no problems telling you if a school needs to move on from a coach or why this coach did X, Y, Z. And I know for a fact that there were issues with Paul Feinbaum's approach now that he was on the SEC network. They didn't want criticism on the SEC network. And this is where you get disingenuous with the fans. The fans aren't idiots. The fans want to see like a real discussion about the schools. And I think that's where these networks kind of missed the mark, in my opinion.
It is a very difficult line to thread between realizing that you're trying to create compelling, interesting content, right? And you can't just be state television, even if that's who's paying for you, because it's boring. Even outside of a couple of specific markets. So you're still trying to create something that's unique and interesting and going to attract eyeballs independent of live events, while also being cognizant of who's actually bankrolling and supporting the entire thing.
Otherwise, just put games on. I mean, if that's it, just put the games on. I mean, that's ultimately what people want to watch anyway. If you're worried about criticism, well, then you probably shouldn't have any of those studio shows. Otherwise, it just kind of become bland.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. It's going to be definitely worth monitoring over these next couple of years, because between this, I think, and the Pac-12 network, you have two pretty fascinating ecosystems and media properties here, right? Where you really can't rely on the conventional business model and just do what everybody else is doing, because then not only will you be third, and you and I might think that that's not a big problem on the football side, Phillips and that staff has been charged to, if we're going to be third, we got to be as close to second as we possibly can. So you're going to have to do some different things, but you're also in a world where there are some constraints upon you, and how they navigate that will be interesting to watch, not just if you're a Virginia fan.
Well, there's two things that I would keep an eye on. As the SEC and the Big Ten become more and more professional football leagues, especially with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, you see the relationship they have with ESPN and the ratings that they get for those marquee matchups. And there's a separate conversation as to why the college football playoff expansion has kind of gotten gummed up is because of the relationship with ESPN. But if we understand that the SEC is going in a direction of more professional football and the Big Ten will likely follow suit as well, the Pac-12 and the ACC are going to, this is where I guess the alliance comes into play.
Right.
Whatever that is. I still don't know what the alliance is.
They're not SEC.
Right. I don't know the future of the network in a world where ESPN or Disney specifically is shifting so much of their resources to online offerings and ESPN Plus and original content. So in 2036, when this contract is up, I mean, I don't even know what television is going to look like in the next 5 years. No. But for the sake of this conversation, what's to stop Disney and ACC honchos from getting rid of the network altogether and it basically becomes rolled into ESPN Plus? It's just a tab on ESPN Plus. I mean, we're seeing some of this already with ESPN where they've taken their studio shows like Highly Questionable and turned them into online-only ESPN Plus vehicles like Debatable.
Right.
I don't know the success rate of that. I don't know if that's what the future is going to look like. What I'm saying is, as Disney continues to see the subscriber base for cable operations and satellite operations dwindle, and more people are perfectly comfortable watching things via Netflix or HBO Max, or maybe not even those types of networks. Kids are just watching YouTube or TikTok, and there's all these other ways that you can be entertained.
Oh, my kids do.
Yeah, I mean, my kids basically will get most of their stuff from a Discord server, or they watch Disney Plus and Hulu. They don't actually watch normal television. Regardless, what's to stop Disney from, 10 years from now saying, okay, this is also now content that becomes online only, in the same way that they've invested in things like Liga MX and other more niche properties that they've thrown money to because they know there's a motivated base that will watch those channels. This is where niche content becomes king, in the same way that we've seen this with podcasts already. It's not like a lot of your lucrative podcasts get these incredibly large numbers of listeners. The reason why they end up successful is because they are targeting a niche that is attractive to a particular type of advertiser and a particular type of audience. Who's to say that doesn't happen with the ACC or the Pac-12 going forward?
I mean, I don't think it's an accident that ESPN has been really aggressive about trying to secure the rights for basically every low and mid-major basketball conference. If you care about FCS football, which is a niche product, and I say that with love, you have to get this product, right?
Your newsletter is a lot of FCS, so yes.
No, exactly. No, I mean, that's basically the Extra Points business model too. Like, I am not for everybody. I am for a certain kind of person, and you don't need that many of them to build something that's financially sustainable. I mean, the math behind broadcasting gets a little bit different, but maybe not overwhelmingly so in the foreseeable future. Joe,
and that's the thing. I think we have to understand that the sports outside of the NFL, sports is an incredibly niche product. And if you go by the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the people out there don't give a crap about sports. Like, one quick anecdote. I remember one time I went to New York for Coach K's 710th win. He was surpassing Bobby Knight at Madison Square Garden for that Champions Classic. And as a bit, we went around Rockefeller Center area where all these people, and we were just making this joke about, oh, obviously you're here for, I think it was like, whatever K. I made it sound like I was talking about a 401k, Yeah. And they were kind of like, what is Congress passing some sort of new bill? I'm like, no, Coach K. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, Coach K is going to pass Bobby Knight. They're like, what are you even talking about? It's like Madison Square Garden. It's right down the way. They had no idea what we're talking about. I think sometimes we get a little too caught up in just how big sports is outside of the NFL. And sometimes we have to lean into understanding that if you don't super serve your hardcore fans, you end up alienating even more people, and then you're left with nothing.
Yeah, that's a very difficult thread to needle for a lot of athletic directors and conferences right now, as you're trying to grow scale versus potentially alienate the core people who are the ones that are ultimately writing the checks,
Mm-hmm.
and in more ways than one. Um, Joe, this has been fascinating. This has been a really, I think, helpful and illuminating conversation. Thanks so much for spending some time with us here today.
Yeah, anytime, man.